that nuance of finding the greenfield, the niche, is probably the single biggest differentiator that will help you escape and go. You can sell to friends at 1 million or make 5 million in revenue. But to escape 10, you have to have a process and you have to have a real market that is differentiated. And that niche will get you there if you can just really ask yourself, am I differentiated? And again, I didn't respect that.
Welcome to the SaaS Revolution Show, a podcast by SaaStock. Here we interview SaaS founders from around the world who've been there and done that, as they share the ins and outs of how they built their businesses, their operations, their path to securing investment, and more. Our mission with the podcast is to help you, the founder, learn how to scale your SaaS, maintain your well-being, and navigate the complexities of this ever-changing industry. I'm your host, Alex Theuma, and together we'll explore the good, the bad, and the ugly in the journey to SaaS success.
Welcome to the SaaS Revolution Show. I'm your host, Alex Theuma, CEO and founder of SaaStock. Delighted to be joined today by Kyle Hanslovan, who's the CEO of Huntress. Welcome, Kyle.
Awesome, Alex. Appreciate you having me.
Yeah, great to have you in Austin. So we're actually live in Austin for the second SaaStock USA. It's just kicked off about an hour ago. First impressions, what are your thoughts?
Pumped. I like probably both the attendance. Colors are looking pretty fashionable. I think you guys have done a great job with brand, but more importantly, representation's pretty strong here.
Awesome. Yeah, no, good to hear. And it's nice. It's getting buzzy, and we're doing the first live podcast of the day. Kyle, I always like to start to get to know, I guess, a little bit more. So tell us, who is Kyle Hanslovan?
Gotcha. So that's a funny question. So career military member, offensive cybersecurity. I work both at NSA and GCHQ. Gathering intelligence. So that's what got me started. Turns out those are only some of the skills it takes to help you become an entrepreneur, though. These days I founded Huntress, and we're about 350 of us crossing the 100 million ARR scale.
Awesome. Congrats. Venture backed?
Yeah. I think right now probably 200 to 300 million total between debt and venture capital.
When did you start the company, and why did you start it?
So 2015, at that time the landscape was all about how do you protect, call it the enterprises of the world. But everybody forgot there was kind of a poverty line between enterprise and mid-sized small business. So for us, it was like, look, these are underserved. How do I take my nation state level skills and help these businesses go toe-to-toe with hackers? Awesome.
And obviously, as you mentioned, you're at 100 million in ARR now. Let's rewind back to maybe the first year, and also let us know how long did it take to get to that first million. What were some of the learnings, in that time?
So in 2015, nobody called it stealth at that time. It was just bootstrapping. What could we do to build a scalable product? So we did from 2015 to probably 2017, really focused on how to build tech while validating it with hypotheses from customers. And we learned the hard way that most of the small businesses we went to didn't have any tech people, didn't have any IT people. So those were some hard lessons learned during that building the product. But by 2018, when we were really starting to go to market, we discovered most of these businesses, when they didn't have an internal IT department, outsourced it. And fast forward it now, 8 years later, we've got 5,000 of those IT outsourcing partners and delivering our product to about 150, 160,000 mid-sized and small businesses.
Awesome. So you realized after time that the partner model was something that was kind of needed.
And that was something I had never even heard of.
Very cool. And then if we go back to thinking about our audience, a lot of them are kind of on that journey to 10 million ARR. So once you hit one, and you're on that journey to 10, how long did that take, and what did you do to get there?
So there was some of the advice I was given earlier stage was about making sure that it wasn't one-off, but a flywheel. Even if the flywheel was slow repeating, how could I get to that? So you could imagine starting at top of funnel, I started asking myself, how many of these could I reach easily, right? And thankfully my addressable market was big enough. And then I learned from those first couple customers, I really had to get down to why were they actually buying my product? Every book will tell you that. But it turns out if you can't learn as a founder, especially as a tech founder, to zip your lips and listen more often, I wasn't necessarily doing that as well in the beginning. It took me probably 5 or 6 times being told, I don't even have an IT department, before I even thought about calling somebody who was the outsourced IT department. And then when I got in there, figuring out it was ease of deployment is what they liked. They were onboarding technology, but most of their technology took weeks to implement. I took that for granted. I didn't even know that was a differentiator. And you could imagine that flywheel of find out what's causing friction, that separates, or prevents you from taking $1 out of their wallet to deliver a service. Like, the books will tell you that, but they won't tell you the grueling pain of like how hard it is to go in and listen to why they're actually using it, because they might not say it.
And you mentioned, obviously, after a few years, like discovering the reseller channel or the partner model. Even actually this morning, we were hosting a breakfast with like 10 founders, and this kind of came up, and there was curiosity there. There wasn't, I think, maybe somebody had started it, but they're kind of at that early stage. And I think in general, probably under 10 million, people are like just figuring out is the partner channel kind of right for them? And it's probably not right for every business. What are some lessons about going into the partner channel? How do you find the partners? How do you get them engaged? Like, what sort of like commission structure? How does that work? How do you keep them, and so on?
So I will tell you, like, coming out of the agency, government work, I didn't know how channels worked. And to be very frank, I had to learn a lot of it. I had to learn their dynamic. And what was funny is, as I spent more time with the channel partner, I was able to ask myself, does it really make sense for me to even be working with them? And the thing I ended up learning was, even as I started raising investment, folks were very skeptical about my ability to reach these, tens of millions of small and mid-sized businesses. They just didn't think that was possible. So actually the channel partner model was buying me credence to my investors who just didn't believe I didn't have something viral. I didn't have a way of getting in front of these hundreds of thousands of companies in my local area, and a channel partner can help you there. However, you talked about things like margins and models. We ended up realizing, instead of just going through a reseller, our customer, these managed service providers, they were both who we sold to and fulfilled through. They weren't just somebody that, usually with a VAR, a value-added reseller, they're just fulfillment, and you're actually selling to the end customer. But since this was a dual persona, it was learning about a market that was emerging in 2015. And for me, it ended up, finding essentially this gap that my competitors hadn't, and it really propelled me. So getting to know all the different flavors of reseller, what's a distributor, what's a value-added reseller, sometimes they'll call them systems integrators, and if you don't learn those nuances as a founder, especially as a technical founder, you're just not going to take advantage. If I would have done any of the old school models, there's no way I'd be on this stage.
Do you do anything direct, or is it all through the partner channel now?
So the first 7 years we were in business, every single lead we brought, we would go and say, hey, we're going to fulfill you through our channel partner. But we learned that some businesses just don't want to go through a partner. And so as of last year, we started exploring. You want to talk about late. Even us, at our scale today, we're still making mistakes. And I ended up learning that if I didn't understand why they wouldn't, and it turned out some of those internal IT departments felt an external IT department was competitive to them. They thought they were going to steal their revenue, steal their budget, and outsource them one day. And so we actually had to change for what we call, to our partners, we call it a partner-first model. Meaning we will sell to anybody, but the last question we always ask is, who would you like to fulfill through? To a customer, that feels like customer choice, though. And that nuance is something that still, 7 years into it, I didn't have mastered. Last year, though, we made the change, and that direct business is, now represents a small portion, 10% of our business, but it is a part of our business we were just dropping on the floor and ignoring customers that wanted to be protected. So,
is it a fair statement? I mean, I'm only taking this really from one single source, but that having a partner model can really help with your net retention revenue.
Yes, as long as you maintain, like for instance, we maintain the support, really when it comes to even like net dollar retention, which is how do you not only land and adopt with your customer, but how do you help your customer expand? So I know when I land with a partner, 12 months later, my partner, because of the help that we do to help them grow and them growing on their own, we're 140% larger. 24 months later, I'm about 190% larger. And if you fast forward to 36 months, it's like 240s on one single product. If you have a partner too, and you start moving into multiple products, which is not something I would ever recommend to somebody sub 10 million ARR, but you should be thinking about that. What's going forward? That partner will also help you move multiple products. So you're in it together. I really appreciate it. I couldn't have done it without it for the small and mid-sized business.
Awesome. And now we sort of touched on it earlier, actually, before we were recording, but we've been asking our customers what their biggest challenges are. And I'd love your views on some of these. Before that, as you're at 100 million, so a little bit further ahead than probably most that are listening and watching this, what's your biggest challenge that you see that Huntress has over the next year and how are you planning on going to solve that?
To be very frank, it was the same trouble that I had at 5, that I had at 15, that I had at 40. It was really hiring for the right stage. And everybody will tell you, hire slow, fire fast. Yeah. But the reality is, you can't just make those mistakes. Yeah. You need to have somebody who can grow at minimum 18 to 24 months with you. Yeah. And if you're high velocity growth, sometimes that turnover happens every 12 months, which nobody warned me as a founder. You're great people today that could be theoretically performing ahead of the momentum. Yeah. 6 months later, they can be on pace with the momentum. Yeah. Add another 6 to 12, they're behind. And that means you as a CEO or founder, you could be replacing some of your most key players every 12 to 18 months if you're high growth. And that's almost a full-time job in itself, let alone doing it. So you really have to think forward, or you will put limits on yourself and your own ability to scale. Yeah.
Are you then mainly are you hiring people that have done it before, or what is it that you're looking for? So let's say you're at 100, I don't know what the next milestone is, let's say 200. Do you want to then get people in the senior leadership team that have done that, or is that a requirement?
I think Elad Gil's High Growth Handbook has a chapter that I really enjoyed. It's actually talking about firing executives, but it really applies to anybody. And even at this stage, the same rule applies. Yeah. I'm realizing that I need to hire somebody who has probably just performed at this level, but not too far from. So for instance, if I'm hiring an engineering leader, I really need to hire somebody. If I'm a 15 person, I don't need somebody who's run a 500 person team. I probably need somebody who's run a 50 person team. And you have to think about that as steps. Only at this later stage have I been able to skip a step. And I'll tell you, the biggest failures I had was trying to skip or to hire somebody too big that just couldn't get scrappy. So the other part of it is setting these people up for when you hire them, being very honest and real with them that you're probably going to have to hire your own boss. If you have that real talk and be transparent, there's a good chance they'll stay. A lot of my earlier leaders are still with me 4 years later, and they've hired their own boss once or twice. But the people who I didn't have that real conversation with, they left me 100% of the time.
Are you a software company struggling to navigate the complex world of payments? We get it. Getting paid should be simple, but as you grow, it gets complicated. Different currencies, payment methods, regulations, and taxes, it's enough to make anyone's head spin. But Paddle's got your back. We handle tax, payments, billing, subscriptions, fraud, and so much more all across the globe. Paddle does the heavy lifting so you can focus on what really matters, your products and your growth. Get started at paddle.com.
Goto Market it's actually typically always one of the main challenges that SaaS founders have. They're struggling in sales and marketing. Right now, perhaps even more so, right? It just seems a lot harder to sell, a lot harder to do marketing, harder to get to the buyer and the buyer to make the decisions. How do you view that? I mean, does that ring true for you? I guess obviously you're going through the partner channel, but you mentioned that you do lots of content and so on. But when you look at the go-to-market and challenges that SaaS is facing, what are your thoughts and how to tackle that?
So Alex, I don't know if you have kids. I've got 3 of them. Yeah, and it doesn't matter how many times I tell them something, they don't always hear the message or the nuance. And sometimes you really have to show them, not tell them. One of the pieces of nuance that I didn't appreciate in the beginning was everybody will say, find your niche, your niche market. It's in every book. But nobody explains what that really means, and it really means something that's so greenfield that folks probably don't think it's the greatest of idea of going there, meaning the laggards, right? The early adopters will see this and say, no, there's real potential. But for me, if I would have gone in any of the other flavors of cybersecurity, when I started in 2015, most of the companies already had 100 million plus raised. I was never going to. Even if I had a better product at a cheaper price, they just had the clout, they had the respect, and who was I? I did not listen to that as a founder, and I touched the hot stove so many times. Thankfully, I ended up learning that that nuance of finding the greenfield, the niche, is probably the single biggest differentiator that will help you escape and go. You can sell to friends at 1 million or make 5 million in revenue. But to escape 10, you have to have a process and you have to have a real market that is differentiated. And that niche will get you there if you can just really ask yourself, am I differentiated? And again, I didn't respect that. My kids don't listen. Turns out I don't listen either.
No, it's good advice. And I'm going to move on to some just quickish fire questions here, Kyle. So, what's the best advice that you've ever received?
Oh my gosh. So there's been a lot of it. Oddly enough, I don't know the advice, but I do remember a moment like founder journey is a roller coaster. Like I will quite literally, even today, be on the highest high, and by the end of the week, I can be like, oh man, I should have stopped doing this. Yeah. And so I guess for me, from founder to founder, there's this passage in Guy Kawasaki's Art of the Start. Okay. He describes a field, and as an early founder, I didn't realize you're kind of like a group of founders that you're in a field dancing. And think about that, 3 people dancing in a field by yourself, you look like crazies. Yeah. But as you start to get your first couple of, maybe even their interns, all right, now you're 7 crazies in a field. But by the time you add a couple customers, or for me, partners, you start getting to a 10, 15-person dance, and it looks like a party, and people want to join a party. Yeah. That high and low, that being able to understand there are parts where you're going to look crazy, there are parts that you're going to be low, and understanding you're going to have to make it through if you want to scale. I mean, it really boils down to conviction, but that is so much easier said than done. I would just remind people of, like, you can be dancing in a field looking crazy by yourself, and you might actually be crazy, but it's okay. You persevere, pivot, figure out why customers are willing to pay you. I would actually, again, as a career tech entrepreneur, I would say your technology is a lot less important than you think. Your go-to-market is way more important than you give credit to, and that'll help you get through the hard times.
What about, if you reflect, so like maybe one of the biggest mistakes you've made and lesson learned from that?
Yeah, so can I go on a personal side? Because nobody gets real about this.
Yeah.
If you have success and if you scale, you are going to misprioritize something. You can't work an 80-hour week, and I know some people say work-life balance. There's just sometimes you have to. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure before this conference is amazing. I bet you were working.
Yeah.
So on my end, 3 kids. Yeah. Mine are currently 19, 17, 13. That means they were 5, 9, and 11 when I founded Huntress. Yeah. I lost some of that time with them. Yeah. Enough to the point that even my partner, it put more on her to be able to help take care of the kids. Yeah. And it ultimately led to divorce. Like, these are real things that people practice, work-life balance, and they talk it, but it comes with sacrifices. I would just make sure, like, you ask yourself, is it a sacrifice you're truly willing to make? Yeah. Because, again, it's a big difference. You want to help people. That change is worth it. It feeds me. It's the dopamine hit. Yeah. But I think nobody talks about what you're going to potentially lose if you can't scale, if you can't hire the right team, if you can't hire, or in my case, sometimes part ways with executives that weren't the right ones. If you don't part ways with that individual, you might part ways with your family, and that's just real.
Yeah, I mean, look, I've done 400 podcasts, and like, whilst we know like divorce stats are generally pretty high anyway, I think, and I don't have the data, it's probably even higher in founders, right? Because again, the amount of like work that they have this second baby or whatever, the company that they're putting so much, as you say, like sometimes 80 hours a week in, and often that you're not present, with the family, you're not there maybe at times when you need to be, and it puts a lot of strain on.
You spend more time with your co-founder than your spouse. Yeah. You spend more time with your employees than your kids.
You do, yeah.
None of that makes sense from the outside, but it's obviously the difference you're making. And I think when you think that way, what am I giving up? It really forces you to prioritize. Yeah. Are you moving fast enough? Yeah. Are you being edgy enough? Are you being direct enough? Yeah. Are you providing enough value?
With let's say these long weeks and hours that you have to kind of put into the company, how do you take care of yourself? Like, what do you do to look after yourself?
So 6 years into it, I was not taking care of myself. Yeah. I was preparing for burnout, and I was, again, roller coaster would get me up there, and then I would crash. And so I had a founder, one of the founders of a great tech startup that scaled to about $2 billion in valuation, told me, hey, the best secret about, more or less therapy is actually life coaching with really, really poor marketing. Yeah. And he's like, you should consider. And so no joke, like I put the ego aside, jumped into like a 1 day a week, just even BSing. Sometimes about the company, sometimes about work. I ended up realizing like I wasn't even taking care of myself. I now regularly go to the gym. I'm spending time eating better or even eating worse, meaning like finding the good desserts places instead of that. But I'm having fun doing it. I'm making time for lifestyle.
Awesome.
So it's just a part of the balance that founders put themselves generally last. And when you do that, you're kind of putting everybody else last too.
Yeah, no, makes sense. And obviously, finally, you're speaking at SaaStock today on the growth stage. What are you talking about? What's going to be within that session?
Most startups won't make it, but they don't talk about that spectrum. They don't talk about where do you fail at. I'm going to try to impart as much wisdom as possible on how to escape that 5 to 10 and get past 50 million. Even though, like, if you make it past 50, you can often make it past 100 to 200. But that's one of the biggest things I'm going to try to share, the spicy lessons learned. This is how to actually escape, gravity.
I think it's something like 0.01% of companies get to 50 million. Like, the odds are really stacked against you doing that. So it sounds like a super interesting talk. Obviously, we'll be, I think we're recording that. It'll be on YouTube. So follow up with that after. But Kyle, thank you so much for being a guest on the SaaS Revolution show today. Lovely meeting you in person. Thanks for coming to SaaStock USA. Looking forward to your talk, and thank you so much.
I couldn't appreciate being here more, and for your audience, if they're not joining a future SaaStock, they're missing out.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of the SaaS Revolution Show. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you learned something from it, check out SaaStock.com/events to find all the upcoming SaaStock conferences around the world. Want exclusive SaaS content and actionable insights to grow your SaaS? Join our community of over 36,000 SaaS founders at SaaStock.com.